Hi, my name is Robin Bowling, and I will be presenting on comprehensible input, and in particular, how we can use comprehensible input to help our novice language learners. So, to start out, the question is, what is comprehensible input, also referred to as CI? If you look at this illustration on the right, it is designed by Elizabeth Detlinger, and you can find it at her blog of senorita.wordpress.com. But basically, why I like this visual is that it shows that comprehensible input is not a single strategy or a method. So it's kind of this umbrella of lots of methodologies or strategies that people can use. So, but the basic concept, and I'll explain some of these. The basic concept, it comes from Krashen, that I is the current proficiency of the student, and the plus one is the comprehensible input level. So, for example, it has to be just beyond the student. So, it is typically teacher delivered input, but it is understandable and slightly above the level of the student. Now, this can take many forms as you look on the visual. Typically, it is going to be oral input, but it is also reading input as well. So if you look at the visual, embedded reading is a strategy of having three different levels of readings. It's the same topic, and the first level is just a paraphrase from the teacher, and then the second, you add a few more vocabulary and structures from the original text. And then the third is that students can access and understand the majority of the original text. TPR is total physical response. So you have lots of gestures. Reader's theater is having students act out and show their comprehension of a story as it is being narrated. Read and discuss is the same idea. You are reading and then using those structures to discuss with a partner. Content based instruction is a part of, especially important for TESOL, and it kind of overlaps with the SIOP model of sheltered instruction when we want our students to understand the academic content, but we have to teach it in English as well. At the top, the movie talk or the picture talk, that is just a teacher paraphrasing teacher input using frequent structures, high frequency structures, and limiting their vocabulary to talk about a movie or a picture or video clip. TPRS storytelling is very compelling to teach with comprehensible input, and also personalizing the questions that you ask students, kind of talking about their weekend or getting to know the students. Listen and draw is another method that students are showing their comprehension as the a story is being narrated and they're drawing. So this all comes down to the natural approach, and the idea is to stimulate a child acquisition of L1. So the reason why I picked this topic is I'm a Spanish teacher. I teach primarily novice language learners, and it is very intimidating for our language learners to take that first step to learn a new language. And especially for our TESOL, for English language learners, those students are adapting already to a new culture, and they're already feeling very overwhelmed. So a lot of the obstacles comprehensible input can address those. So, for example, it helps focus the student's attention, especially in academic classes. It helps them not to feel overwhelmed or defeated if the language is overly complex in other areas. It also, in my experience, has lowered the student's anxiety by increasing their engagement in the topics that we talk about. And also, the ACTFL, or the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, recommends that 90% of the instruction time is conducted in the target language. So for English language learners, we are obviously conducting the class in English, but for my Spanish classes, I need to conduct the language of the classroom in Spanish, but that has to be at a level that is comprehensible for those students, because if they are not understanding it, then nothing is being acquired. So that is my goal for this presentation, is to show how we can use this approach with novice language learners. So let's start with some research. The main researcher, of course, is Stephen Krashen, a large, well-known name in second language acquisition. And he came up with several theories, and I'm going to show you the ones that are most important to comprehensible input. First of all, the input theory. This is where the idea of I+1, of comprehensible input came about. And his idea is that the speech will naturally emerge once the learner has had enough input. So this is also based on the first language acquisition as well. The next topic is learning versus acquisition. So Krashen distinguished between explicit studying and learning of a language versus unconscious acquisition. And in my research, Stephen Krashen and Bill Van Patten, who also supports Stephen Krashen's theories, said that the mental representation that we have in our heads cannot come from explicit grammar instruction. So in order for our students to acquire a language, they need exposure to examples of those structures in context, and then they can acquire that mental representation. So this is the idea behind, we want our students to be absorbing and understanding the language instead of studying the grammar first. And so this value of communication over the grammatical forms also goes along with communicative language teaching. And the last theory that helps explain comprehensible input is Krashen believed that learners acquire a language better in an environment with less anxiety. So if you can lower the affective filter of the students, then they are more comfortable and they will be able to acquire the language quickly. Now, to show both sides of the research, there are several criticisms of Krashen as well. And basically, the criticisms are that the intake, or the language that is actually internalized from the input, is very difficult to measure. So this made some of the research difficult. Another criticism is there is a lack of explicit instruction, which some researchers claim could cause fossilization and inaccurate language. And a big criticism as well is the lack of student production of language. So Krashen believes that input is the only thing that you need for acquisition, but other researchers have shown that possibly input alone may not guarantee language acquisition. So Merrill Swain came up with the output hypothesis. And basically, the output hypothesis is that when learners are pushed to produce output, that they become more aware of the gaps between their language abilities and what the other speakers are saying. So once learners notice that gap, then they can improve their accuracy and make their input more similar to the input that they are receiving. And so she calls this modified input. And one of the studies that I examined during my research also showed that the output with corrective feedback showed better results and more higher accuracy and better retention and comprehension than just a group that only relied on input. So how do we apply this to the classroom? There are a variety of strategies we can use from the visual at the beginning of the presentation, but important is to, whenever you're giving oral input, that there is a visual aid, that students can also even connect print and to help develop literacy skills. Another idea is to shelter the vocabulary, you rely on cognates, use high frequency structures, just to make sure that basically that using you're making the most of the limited classroom hours, that you are using vocabulary that helps them understand. Circumlocution, offering an alternative explanation or talking around a topic so that they understand the term that you're using instead of going directly to translation. And sometimes that is not possible in an ESL classroom, anyways. The gestures, this relies on TPR and body language and helping communicate your idea non-verbally as well as verbally. And some other strategies that will help you is to choose engaging topics. Keep the students, keep personalizing the topics so that students feel that they are involved, interactive in the classroom, and also that the topics um, keep their affective filter very low. So, for example, one of the researchers that I read about, Martina Bex, is very common in foreign language methods, and she said that she recommended even trying to um, have a cultural topic or a cultural content that would help students acquire their intercultural competence and also their linguistic competence at the same time. Addressing the affective factors was what we talked before about lowering that affective filter, but also just allowing students to talk about and voice how they are feeling during the language learning process. Most people recommend having a symbol or a way that students can communicate when they are overwhelmed or confused. And one of the authors also that I researched, Krauss, he also advocated the use of language logs and having students reflect on what were their strongest moments, their successful moments, and also what were their most frustrating moments that week. And so a weekly language log might also help. And another idea to balance all of the research that I have presented here is to follow up with explicit instruction. If you follow Long's method, he recommends keeping the focus on communication, but addressing that focus on form whenever it comes up in conversation or students ask more about it. The idea is that the students are exposed to the structures first, okay, that they see how they are used in a meaningful context, and then later you can follow up with explicit instruction and kind of have the best of both aspects of the research. And then as more years of input and students advance the proficiency, then they can handle more explicit instruction if needed. So in conclusion, I advocate from the research, we advocate for a balanced approach in making sure that the input and the output are both used depending on the stage of acquisition. So, for example, we can use from Krashen that the students take what is gained from the input and they interact with other speakers, but then we can also use Swain's output hypothesis that the student will receive corrective feedback from interacting with the other speakers, and then they will have modified input that they can then try to kind of imitate or become closer to the speech of other speakers. So I think it kind of goes in a cycle, and I think it's important for us as language teachers that we have to understand the role and the research behind input and output, so that way we know when to use both of them in the appropriate stages of acquisition for our language learners. Thank you.